You're listening to COB, Conversations on the Business of Brands, with Sudeep Chawla and Sharavana Raghavan.
The year has begun. It's been a week. But Sudeep, are you ready?
Ready for what, Sharan?
This podcast is about the business of brands. So are you ready? Are you ready to build?
Are you posing this question to me or to the listeners of the podcast?
It's primarily to the listeners. More to say, are you ready? How ready is your business to begin brand building? Very often we meet entrepreneurs who say they're too early for brand building. And just to make things worse, a few months ago, Donald Miller, the author of Building a Story Brand, he gave a speech about saying how businesses must not look to build a brand until they've hit a certain turnover. I vehemently disagree with that point. I know you do too.
Yeah, correct. We spoke about it earlier. I believe possibly Donald Miller was talking about investment or advertising or marketing, not really brand building.
But I like what you said in one of the earlier podcasts, branding before marketing, where you said branding starts even before the business does, even when the germ of the idea forms in the entrepreneur's head. When people say, am I ready for branding? Am I ready for marketing? They can't do it overnight. What happens a lot of places is that people decide to focus only on the operations. Any business is considered good business. And then one day they say, now we need more money, we need more sales. Let's start brand building, and they start advertising. But for that money that they spend on advertising and marketing to have effect on the business, the basic brand fundamentals need to be in place. And if that is not in place, your money is going to be wasted and you will not see too much impact on your business. In fact, there is a greater chance of it's like putting a mic in front of a bad singer. A mic doesn't make you a great singer. If you're a bad singer, it only amplifies how bad a singer you are to the rest of the world. So the same thing happens to a brand that's not cohesive and spends on marketing. It ends up being disastrous. Are you ready as a business, as a brand, to build, to scale, and to accelerate your business? That's the question.
Talking about brand fundamentals, we are actually going back to what you stated in one of the episodes as Brilliant Basics, where we spoke about Tang. And in that particular brand, before we started brand building, we put a lot of basics into place.
And brand building itself, unlike most people tend to believe, is not a function of how much money you can spend. It is about the mindset of the founder or the leadership that can drive brand strategy.
So now, if I want to take up one of the questions that you really started with, when do we start to check? Where do we start to check if a brand is ready to scale or to get investments? How do you decide?
It doesn't really matter where we start as long as you manage to cover all the bases that hold up the brand in place. There's an acronym that I use called BCAMP, BCAMP, which is business trajectory, competition intensity, audience understanding, messaging consistency, and positioning clarity.
Interesting. B camp.
So B stands for business trajectory, right? Now, every business maturity level and its relevance on brand building kind of varies. And in general, as a business matures, it has a better understanding of itself and the issues that confront it. This allows for a business to create a more targeted and more effective marketing execution. But when you take up brand building as a crisis aversion, you end up doing a very, very myopic marketing activity. Let's say you had a downturn in business. And at that time, you say, oh, I've never really built a brand. I want to start focusing on brand building now. Your mindset is not about growth. Your brand is supposed to trigger growth. But in a crisis, you're looking to avoid loss. And at that time, if you start building a brand, you are not clear in your mind. A brand strategy, like any strategy, is about more of what you are not allowed to do than what you're allowed to do. And in a crisis, when you are not allowed to do something is when all your hairs stand up and you're ready for a fight. And the system is ready for a fight. It's the worst time to start brand building. And sometimes what happens in a large business, even if there's no crisis, the brand has actually built multiple versions of itself with different parts of the system. The sales might call it something else. In fact, even within sales, there could be different leaders who are defining the brand very differently. Building a brand at that stage requires terrific effort. The earlier you start, the earlier you have your basics in place, the better. But depending on how fast or how big your brand is, or at what stage your business is, branding has that much of an effect. You need to bring all of that together to make sure is your business in the right place to begin brand building.
In fact, regardless of whether you are brand building or not, your brand is getting built. If you're giving discounts on Amazon and you're attracting consumers towards you, you might not be doing any brand building, but fortunately or unfortunately, you are building a discounting brand.
Exactly. Your reputation is getting set in the market.
How I read your business trajectory point is that the longer you are in the journey, one, you have created one or multiple versions of your brand already. So always recognize that. Whenever you start consciously now brand building, what you're actually doing is you're steering the brand into a certain direction, which might or might not be in sync with what your brand has already built. Yeah. So therefore, it is foolish to think that you're starting brand building. You're actually starting brand steering because brand is getting built by everything that you do.
And this really varies on where the business is. And sometimes what happens is if a business has gone on for quite a while, the brand is almost irrevocably damaged.
Fair, it makes sense. What's the next one?
C, competition intensity. At the end of the day, game theory has its place. What your competitors do and say affect your brand one way or the other. Now, category of play is by far the biggest impact on any brand building effort. High competition means low effectiveness to start with for your efforts, and reduced competition can even indicate the need for customer education and sometimes even a non lucrative opportunity. So it's important for a business to frame the competition context very clearly. So, what happens with a lot of entrepreneurs is that they're so much in love with their idea. I hear this surprisingly very often is that we don't have any competition. And that's never true. Consumers have not been waiting around for you to come and solve their problems. They're solving it one way or the other. What you're offering is a better solution. So, what is your competition frame of reference? You need to understand that first. And once you've chosen your category, you've chosen your competitors you're going to take on, then it helps you set your marketing objectives very clearly. And without marketing objectives, we've spoken about this also before to say, if you don't have an objective, you don't know what you're doing with your marketing money, with your advertising money. So you need clarity. And this competition intensity or the competition framework tells you where your business is going to come from.
I think it makes sense. Framing your competition is critical. Knowing your relative positioning is also critical because before you get to advertising or before you get to communicating your positioning vis-a-vis competition, it is a significant input into your branding itself. How you define your brand, what are the kind of values, attributes, benefits you associate with your brand such that you get advantage against competition becomes a significant part of your branding. And the clearer you are there, you will be able to communicate it more effectively.
And we are coming to positioning a little later, which is the P of the B camp. But here, the point I'm trying to additionally make is that it gives you clarity on your business agenda and therefore your marketing agenda. You will not say, I want business from everybody. No. You know who you're going to get business from, you know where your source of volume is going to come from, your source of customers are going to come from. So take for example Harpic. So I worked in the brand a while ago. In India, let's say a new toilet cleaner brand is launching. They don't have the job of educating consumers about using toilet cleaners. Because toilet cleaner penetration in India is roughly about 30%, branded toilet cleaners. And a new person entering this category, let's say it's a green toilet cleaner, environment friendly, they have a positioning says I'm better than Harpic. Their job is to get business from current Harpic users or current branded toilet cleaner users. That is it. Their job is not to tell people why a branded toilet cleaner is important versus the phenyl and the bleach and the acid they use. That's Harpic's job. The new guy only has to go after the existing players and get share from people who already converted users into branded toilet cleaner users. Let's say there's a business that's come up with a Bluetooth controlled ultraviolet rays enabled self cleaning water bottle. That doesn't exist in the market. You've got to educate people about why a self cleaning bottle is important. And you spend enough money saying, I'm going after people who are using the high end water bottles already and telling them there is an even better solution. And you might not even have a competition context there. Or you might have a competition context of the ultra high end water bottles who don't deliver this functionality.
Or if you were to frame your competition slightly differently, you could say that regardless of the bottle that you have, however ultra high, ultra low, finally the bottles are cleaned using at best a bottle cleaner and a liquid. So that becomes your competition, and therefore that is something that you have to really reposition in consumers' head. What's the next one, Sharon?
Next one's A, audience understanding. And this is something I struggle with a lot of my clients. My brand is for everybody. Why will I stop anybody from buying my brand? So one thing that we tell everybody who we come across is that if a brand tries to be everything to everybody, it is sure to end up as meaning nothing to anybody. Without a brand strategy in place, and the sales team is possibly selling it to anybody who will buy, there is severely detrimental signs in the long run because you have tough time deciding who you're building the brand for because each consumer is going to react very differently. And if you start responding to each and every one of them, you don't know who it's eventually going to be built for. And identifying and understanding the right target audience is super crucial for any business. It helps you create a brand that resonates with your core target audience. It's not about saying who you will not sell to, it is about saying who you are building the brand for. My best example for this is Pepsi. Pepsi and Coke are pretty much identical products. Blind test, 90 out of 100 will not be able to tell the difference. And Coke is positioned as this family beverage for in-home consumption with a meal. And Pepsi is the expression of youth. It does not mean Pepsi is not consumed indoors or Coke is not consumed outdoors. So it is as simple as that, knowing who you're building the brand for. Even now, this Vim was a Vim for men. I thought it was stupid. But let's say it was a real campaign. If they were going after men who are doing dishwashing, how many men do dishwashing? Is that even a viable target audience? I know they did it more to be newsworthy and for LinkedIn marketing, but it is not a sizable audience at all. They have no idea who they were going after with that. Are they telling women now men must take more share? Who are they talking to? It doesn't make sense. There's no quantifying of the audience. There's no signaling of the audience. But the exact opposite of that is Fair and Handsome for me. When they launched in 2006, 2005, I thought that was capturing the male fairness cream market, or rather creating it when people were just shy about it. And I think 40% of all fairness creams were being bought by men or being used by men, but not being bought by men because they were shy to be seen buying a Fair and Lovely or a women's fairness cream. And Fair and Handsome just brought them out of the closet, and putting a Shah Rukh Khan there kind of took away all the biases. And that had a sizable market to go after. They knew who they were building it for. It was the person who had an inferiority complex about his dark skin complexion. and they built it just for them. A lot of us could have found the communication cringeworthy, but it cracked a completely new category. That is understanding the target audience.
In one of our earlier episodes, we spoke about defining core consumers and growth consumers. Yeah, core consumers are people who are contributing about 50, 60, 70% to your current revenue. And growth consumers are people who are going to contribute 50, 60, 70% of your additional growth that you're going to trigger. And hence, that forces you to make choices. And like you're rightly saying, if you make choices and you design your branding and your advertising specifically for that audience, you're bound to create affinity, thereby hopefully great response from that consumer set, and they then become your Cassandra, your propagandists.
The whole point is to resonate with your audience and make your brand relatable. And if you don't frame that audience tightly, who are you going to resonate with?
You're listening to COB, Conversations on the Business of Brands. Your hosts are Sudeep Chawla, marketing practitioner, business leader, and educator to advertising and marketing professionals, and Sharavana Raghavan of Vitril Innovations, consultants to consumer-facing brands and businesses. For more information, go to copcast.net. If you find this podcast helpful, please help us by telling your friends and rating us.
What's the next one?
M is for messaging consistency. I believe an entrepreneur first, entrepreneur, the leadership team, should be as comfortable talking about their brand for 1 minute, 3 minutes, or even 3 hours at the drop of a hat. And it should not vary from one person to another. That's how clear the brand's communication or the brand's core messaging must be. Because consistent messaging actually compounds the marketing effectiveness. And some random statements become pop culture only because they were consistently messaged. One farcical thing I can recall is "Kya chal raha hai, fog chal raha hai." Bas. It made no sense, but it did so well because it just registered repeatedly, hammered into your head.
Yeah.
And that was on mainstream communication. But imagine a sales guy going into the market saying, the first thing they ask within sales also, "Kya chal raha hai? Fog chal raha hai." And that kind of gives you such a segue into getting fog distributed first.
Yeah.
That was lovely. And it helps establish a clear and cohesive brand narrative that resonates with everybody. And what does this cohesive communication do? It builds trust and credibility. And on the other hand, if you have very inconsistent messaging and constantly varied messaging, it only leads to confusion and mistrust with the consumers. And imagine if there's a salesperson of a brand you're engaging with. They tell you one story of why you should be using the brand. You say yes, and then the service person comes in and tells you a different story. Not a lie, but their own version of a story that could be very fair in their perspective, but very different from what the salesperson told you. Would you ever trust that brand? And that inconsistency is enough to get people to be wary of a brand. It doesn't even have to be something of a bad experience. And that is why messaging consistency is important.
When you spoke about fog, it's an interesting one. Fog has done different messaging, but they've done it consistently over a period of time, then shifted to next, then did consistent. So when they started, they spoke about only Dio, no gas. And they did that for a fair bit of time, created a specific positioning. Then possibly they wanted to appeal to a wider audience, not just value conscious audience. And then they moved to this one, your kya chal raha hai, fog chal raha hai.
And they don't change their messaging at least for 12 to 18 months, I think. They kind of keep it and they bombard the GRPs with it.
Yeah. For our listeners, you can reflect on brands which have had consistent positioning for 7, 10, 12, 15 years. For example, Cadbury Dairy Milk, Kuch Meetha Ho Jaye. And then there are brands like Fog and many more that, again, great brand builders. They have not held a positioning for 15 years, but they've made sure that for at least 2 years they consistently spend behind the brand by hammering one particular message. And since it's a high grp category, so therefore these brands tend to spend a lot every year, and hence you get exposed to their advertising lot many times. And hence, like Sharon said, and most of the guys who are financially savvy would know, law of compounding is something that a lot of people speak about. It works for brands also.
The more you do it, the gains get that much faster and bigger. And there is another school of thought that no matter how many narratives there are in the market, marketing can bring all of them together. That's not a very easy thing to do. And similarly, in the case of brand trajectory, if there are too many different narratives that are being built, people are pulling in different directions, that has to be set right before you can start investing in your marketing and advertising. Without that, you're only going to lose most of the money you're going to put into it.
So this is fine. So we have done B, C, A, M. What's the P about?
P is what you already touched upon, so the positioning. Most of from what we've spoken, you think is very straightforward, but you'd be surprised at how everybody wants to stand out and build a brand and following of their own. Every entrepreneur, every manufacturer of a brand wants to stand out and build their own following. But when it actually comes to positioning, the instinct is to fit in. Because if you don't fit in, it seems like a risk. You're saying you almost lose confidence at that moment of truth where you have to make that call to say, I will stand out from the category. You're saying, let's do what's working in the category first. You would take a safety first approach. And that actually can spell doom. At that point, no matter what you advertise, is not going to work for your brand. It at best might work for the category. And worse, it might end up working for your competition. Misattribution can happen because a brand with the largest share of voice will get the attribution because you're not saying anything new. You're still just selling the category. And that is where a problem is. If you're not clear about your positioning, if you're not sure what is it that you stand for, if you're not differentiated enough versus competition, then you should not be advertising and marketing, and you cannot go on the journey of brand building because you are going to lose money again. And doing something different to the norm seems risky, but sticking to the norm is far, far riskier in the business of brands.
What also resonates with me is that when you are trying to take a position, the safety first approach always kicks in. And therefore, if I were to try and solve that dichotomy, I would say that there are some category fundamentals that every brand who plays in every brand that plays in this category would need to conform to. So if you are a soft drink brand, you better quench thirst. If you are a chocolate brand, you better be tasty. If you are a clothing brand, you better be comfortable, etc.
Exactly. Those are table stakes.
Those are table stakes. So therefore, your fitting in and standing out don't need to be at contradiction with each other. You can fit in by making sure that you are covering all your table stakes, but then find one or two standout propositions that will help people remember you differently from your competitors. In fact, a lot of those standout positioning, a lot of those time they have no legs into your product features also.
Yeah, they don't need to.
Yeah, no, sometimes if they have, why not? But a lot of time they don't. Now I was just trying to think of a commodity category where it is very difficult to have any kind of differentiation. Yeah, for example, rice or undergarments. Yeah, these are categories which are sufficiently commoditized. Yet some brands have created a name for themselves. If you think about the undergarment category, there is the Lux Cozy Andar Ki Baat Hai. Now, ye Andar Ki Baat Hai has nothing to do with the product. But the fact that they have said it so many times, the messaging consistency has allowed them positioning. Then there was Amul Macho. Ye to bada toying hai. It has nothing to do with product benefits or product attributes, but it's still, again, repeated, consistent messaging leading to creation of positioning. So let me just summarize a little bit for the TLDR audience. We said that when is a brand ready to receive investments so that they get the best ROI out of it. And Sharan's point was, if you get these 4-5 basics in place, or rather brilliant basics in place, you will be able to create excellent ROI from the investments that come in. He started off by speaking about difference between branding and marketing. Yeah, so therefore the branding starts from the time you are thinking about an idea and you start building uh, any kind of narrative around the brand. And marketing starts when you start investing behind it, when you start taking your brand promise to your consumers. And therefore, before the investment, you need to think of B camp. BCAMP. B stands for business trajectory, where we spoke about the fact that you need to start thinking about branding from the time you're even before your business has started. The more late you are in your business trajectory, it becomes very difficult to steer your brand towards a particular branding. And by that time, whether you deliberately create it or not, your brand has created some kind of imagery in consumers' head. And therefore the business would have to work so much harder to correct it in the direction that you want to take it to. Judge which part of business trajectory are you at, and that will tell you what is the kind of effort you would need to put in. The second part was competition intensity. You need to be clear, who are you competing with, what is your relative advantage against them, and so therefore that will also tell you what is the kind of effort that you will need to put in to make sure that you stand out against the rest of the competitors. The third bit was audience understanding, where Sharan made a specific point that too often we steer clear from making sharp choices of our audience, and we get greedy where we want to sell to everybody. And therefore always remember, if you are not selling to one TG, if you are selling to everyone, you are selling to no one. Second last point was around messaging consistency, where we invoked the law of compounding, and we said that the more you repeat a message, the better chances you have of getting ROI against it. On messaging consistency, we also spoke about the fact that there have been brands which have repeated the same message over and over again for decades. And then there are brands in high GRP category specifically who make sure that at least for 2 years, their messaging doesn't change. And they keep repeating it till the time it gets ingrained into consumers' head, and then they take it to the next level. Last but not the least is positioning clarity, where Sharan speaks about the fact that once you've decided what your innate features, etc. are, and you've looked at the competition, do not feel afraid to stand out. So Sharan, I love Bcamp, and I think it is a great way for a brand to understand where they are. Is there a way of really checking against it? While I understand the fundamentals of all of these, how does a business check where they are against these?
Well, there are different measures you can use. What we've done at Vitral is we put together a bit of a quiz, and it doesn't take you more than 10 minutes to take that quiz. And it is about asking you to pick the right answer. It is about asking you to say yes or no to a few questions. And that will throw up where you stand on each of these factors on Bcamp. And that itself will tell you where you stand and where you need to improve on before you start spending money on your marketing and advertising. So I'm going to link that quiz here. It's free. So anybody who's interested in taking that quiz should take it. It doesn't take you more than 10 minutes. Take it and let us know what you think of this quiz.
Thank you, Sharan. Thanks a lot.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening to COB, Conversations on the Business of Brands with Sudeep Chawla and Sharavana Raghavan. Subscribe and learn more at cobcast.net. That's COBBCAST.net.